Look, I believe that simple recipes can teach us the most about cooking and techniques. While learning to cook, if you're doing a complicated recipe, it's sort of hard to see the forest through the trees. When you start out, you should be cooking stuff that's simple, tasty, and pretty easy to replicate. If you do this enough, you start to build like an arsenal of techniques and ingredients that you can start to draw on for later. It's like a good foundational base for your whole cooking journey. I want to teach you chicken piccata and the techniques for it through the lens of my childhood. This is one of my earliest food memories, and there's a lot of different things wrapped up in it. I associate it with family and anxiety. So I want to take you on the journey of how an anxious kid who really hates food grew up to be someone who really, really adores food. That's the lens that I want to look at this through. Let's make some chicken piccata. The recipe itself is a classic. Beautiful chicken cutlets, pan-fried, smothered in a fragrant lemon caper pan sauce. The whole dish itself comes together pretty quickly, which is nice. That goes back to learning techniques that are easy to replicate for future use. We're gonna start this process by butterflying the chicken breast. So chicken breasts have one side that's usually like a little bit thicker. We want the whole thing to be equally thin so it cooks quickly and we can get it browner faster. So you're gonna make your cuts into the side of the chicken breast and slowly open it up just like this. And then you've got one large, even thin chicken breast. In our family, we always cut them in half, but if you want those nice large cutlets, you can absolutely do that as well. We're gonna season those with salt and pepper now. The salt's gonna draw out a little bit of the moisture, but by seasoning the chicken now, the salt sort of dissolves into the juice of the chicken and completely penetrates into the center of the chicken. So you end up with better tasting, juicier chicken, which in my book is a win. These butterflied and seasoned pieces are gonna get coated in flour. I don't use a separate bowl for this. For me, that's just too many steps, too many dirty dishes. So all I do is grab handfuls of flour and sprinkle it over the sheet tray that the chicken is sort of resting and seasoning on. The chicken's gonna hold on to what it needs and you're pretty much good. Toss it back and forth in your hands and you're gonna be good to go. The dredge is really simple. We're not making fried chicken here. And speaking of fried chicken and chicken nuggets were on a very short list of things that I really, really enjoyed eating growing up. I was a pretty picky eater, but I sort of had a good, honestly, in my opinion, a good reason to be picky. Around middle school, I started sort of developing like a heavy anxiety. That's about the time when I remember having my first panic attack. And for me, food and having a stomach ache was sort of a pretty bad trigger. If you've had anxiety, you know that it's usually not like an actual fear. It's usually something that's maybe not irrational, but something that you can't fully explain. And then you get that like wash of anxiety that like comes from the back of your neck and it just like covers you and it's the worst feeling. For me, when I started getting stomach aches, that would sort of churn up those feelings of anxiety and then that would trigger the panic attack itself setting in. I had to stay away from foods that were potentially gonna make me feel a little weird or a little off because that could be enough to just like set me down the path to a panic attack, which really sucked. I had to deal with that level of like food anxiety a lot, like pretty much my entire middle school and high school. Things started to change when I started going to therapy, but another thing that really, really helped, honestly, was diving in and becoming completely infatuated with Food Network. I grew up in like what I call the golden age of Food Network. It was like a sick time for some amazing, amazing food content. And after school, there was an hour of Unwrapped and Good Eats, which was like Mark Summers talking about snack food and how they're made, and then Alton Brown talking about recipes themselves and doing like really, really beautiful scientific deep dives into the recipes. And that was the best. And I ate that up. And that is, I think, part of the process that helped me really get through this anxious food time. But I'll get back to the recipe and talk about that a little bit later. The chicken is coated and can hang out for a minute while we chop some veggie. You're gonna mince a shallot. So to do that, you're gonna cut off the end with the root just slightly so the shallot stays together, and then you're gonna cut off the tip. You're gonna cut it in half and then peel off the skin that's on the outside. Sometimes you have to like sacrifice the outer layer. That's fine. Cut horizontal cuts into the side of one of the halves and then vertical cuts. Turn the shallot and just slice through and you're gonna get a beautiful little mince. That's sort of the way you cut onions. That's the way you can cut shallots. Shallots are great for a pan sauce like this because they cook really quickly. They're not as harsh as an onion flavor and you can use the whole thing. So you're kind of like set for a perfect little pan sauce bite. I also like 2 cloves of garlic for this. I'm just gonna mince those how I usually do, crush them, peel the skin off, and then run your knife, like put your hand on the back of the knife and go, you're set. Capers make this dish what it is, chicken piccata. It's very important for it. They're like little salty, vinegary flavor bombs. Like they are so tasty. They're packed in a vinegar salty solution, and you can use probably like close to a tablespoon or so. Just use a fork to fish them out, leave the juice, and you've got your capers ready to go. Put them in with the garlic because they're gonna go in at the same time that the garlic does. This is a lemony chicken dish, so we need a lemon as well. For the lemon itself, I like 2 different types. One is gonna go in with the sauce as it cooks. The other is gonna be just little segments that you can squeeze on at the end if people want a little bit extra lemon. It's just nice to have that final brightness. For the one for the sauce, if you cut it far enough off center, you leave all the seeds still in the center, and then you've just got this little cheek that you can squeeze into the sauce and not get the seeds. You don't have to like cover your hand. You don't have to do this, it just makes it really easy. And then for the segments, this is a nice little restaurant type tip. If you cut a lemon in half, take off the 2 ends and then cut that half sort of into fourths diagonally. So you'll end up with 4 little segments with the ends cut off. And now that center little point where all of the seeds are can just be sliced off. That removes the seeds and you're left with these just little beautiful gems that can go on the plate and everybody can squeeze on if they want a little bit of lemon. It's a nice little thing, looks nice. You don't have to do it, it just saves you from having to pick out seeds later. One thing that I wanna show you is like a sick pan sauce trick that I use a lot that leads to a thick and glossy, delicious, well-made pan sauce. In a restaurant, there's usually a homemade stock that they're using, and those stocks contain gelatin from all the bones that have been cooked in. That leads to thick, like jello-y type stock that when they cook into a pan sauce holds on to fat really nicely. So if you've got a stock that has gelatin in it, you don't end up with a sauce that's kind of greasy because the butter and the fat haven't fully integrated into the liquid. We're just gonna use a little packet, sprinkle on some unflavored gelatin. You don't have to be precise with this, just kind of enough. If you've got like a container where your chicken stock is, we need 1 cup of it. If you've got that container, just sprinkle it on to coat the top of that container. You're not gonna use the whole packet of gelatin, just wrap it up, save it for later. That's enough to make the pan sauce a little bit thicker, a little bit more like of that like lip coating, delicious, unctuous, and we're just gonna mimic that by faking it. At the stove, get a saute pan over medium-high heat to pan fry those cutlets in. Coat the bottom of the pan in enough olive oil to crisp the chicken in. Get those daddies in there and let them get loads of beautiful browning. Let them basically sit on that first side until they've taken all the browning that they can. Because they're so thin, you can pretty much just judge the cook on it by the browning itself. You're not really running the risk of getting any pink chicken. The first side that we sit in the pan is probably what's gonna be facing up on the plate. That's gonna be the side that gets more brown, so that's gonna get the majority of the browning. These need like 4 to 5 minutes to cook in total. Let's say like 3 of those minutes is gonna be on the first side. That's gonna get beautifully browned, crunchy deliciousness. The other side probably isn't gonna look as nice because we don't wanna overcook the chicken. The pan itself is a temperature, the chicken is colder than the pan. If you add all of it in at once, the temperature in the pan's gonna drop, and that's not what we want. So be aware of that. Cook them in batches, it'll make it better. Turn the heat down to like a low, medium low. Add your shallots in and let those get a little bit brown. We're not looking for like caramelized. They're just gonna get soft and a little bit browned and just sort of beautiful from the olive oil that's still in the pan. From there, add your garlic and capers and let that cook for a minute as well. You don't really wanna take the garlic to like a brown stage at this point. Just let it soften. Garlic can be really sharp and harsh when it's not cooked. So by doing this, we take away a little bit of that sharpness, we mellow it out, make it a little bit sweeter. It's delicious. From there, add in a splash of white wine, and I don't have a measurement for this because it literally is just like a splash, just enough to cover the bottom of the pan, give a little bit of that wine sweetness. This is a Pinot Grigio. You could use like a Sauv Blanc, but totally up to you. Use a wine that you like to drink with. Pour that in. Let that cook down completely. You want it to be basically dry after the wine has cooked down. This is the alcohol cooking out. I also like to add like a little pinch of chili flake, like a very tiny bit. Add in all of your chicken stock in that gelatin. Turn the heat to like a medium high. Let that bubble away and let the liquid cook out. You don't want this to be like completely dry at this point. This is where all of the texture from the sauce is gonna come from. Like once you can run your spatula through the sauce and the walls of the liquid take a long time to come back together, sort of like, I don't know, Moses in the Red Sea, like it takes a little bit of time before the sauce coats the pan again, that's when you're good. If it coats the back of the spoon, this is a term called nappe, that is about the point that we wanna be at. Gelatin's gonna help us get there. If you were just using a straight up stock from a carton, it would be harder to get to that point. Now we need to do the 3 final steps to the sauce. One is seasoning. So you want to taste it, crack in some pepper, maybe a little bit of salt. The flavor on this needs to be too intense. Keep in mind that we're gonna add lemon in a second. We want this to be sharper than you would normally have because there's not a ton of sauce, and this is gonna be served with the starch and the chicken itself. Remember, the chicken is just seasoned with salt and pepper, so if the sauce tastes too intense on its own, it's gonna be perfect with the chicken and with the starch that goes along with this. Our seasoning is done. Now we need to adjust the texture, which we can do so by a process of emulsifying cold butter into the pan sauce. So turn the heat off and let it cool down slightly. Add about 1.5 tablespoons of cubed cold unsalted butter and just swirl the pan around. Mix it with the spatula, swirl the pan. Fat in the butter and the water in the butter are basically going to slightly thicken the sauce. The gelatin helps the fat mix in, and you end up with a little bit of a creamier sauce than if you didn't have the dairy from the butter in it. It's a beautiful technique to finish any sauce. So we've got the seasoning, we've got the texture, and then the last thing is the final bit of acid that we need, that little bit of lemon juice that we're gonna squeeze from that cheek we made earlier, and that is just going to finish the sauce. If your sauce is broken from your process of mixing the butter in, the little bit of water that's in the lemon is actually going to be enough, probably bring the sauce back to life. If you ever break a sauce, you can add a little bit of water and that's gonna help it in general. That is the process of making a pan sauce. In any situation, you basically cook your protein, add a little bit of aromatic veggies, maybe add a little wine, cook that down, add your main liquid, cook that down, make sure there's a little bit of gelatin in it so it creates like a nice tacky, beautiful mouthfeel. Turn off the heat, add butter, season it, and that's a sauce. That's pretty much every pan sauce ever. They're all different combinations of it, but that's all you need. And that's how you get to chicken piccata, beautiful deliciousness. So our delicious pan sauce is finished, ready to coat those chicken pieces we cooked earlier. It wouldn't be one of my videos if I didn't break with tradition. Normally this would be served with like a plain spaghetti noodle or maybe like an angel hair. We never really used spaghetti growing up, ironically enough. We always used white rice, and I think that's delicious. It gives you something to soak up all the sauce. It's, in my opinion, way less plain than just like plain spaghetti, and it's really, really nice. So that's what I do. That's how I serve it. Put down a layer of rice on the plate, add a couple pieces of the chicken, coat it in that beautiful pan sauce we took the time to make, and relish in something that is really, really exciting and delicious, but also took you probably like 20 minutes to finish. Add those lemon slices, those little segments if you want them, and squeeze them over the top. Finish it with a little bit of parsley. It's beautiful, it's delicious, and you're gonna be really happy that you made it. For me, I think the process of watching and learning and gaining understanding about food really helped me open up my eyes to the world of delicious cuisine. I don't know, like the understanding itself helped me not be afraid of eating and trying new foods, which again was a big trigger. Like being afraid of eating new foods isn't something a middle school kid should really have to deal with. That's kind of the time when you're like, oh, I wanna eat this was fun. As I watched more and more and just soaked up more information, really was able to grow into a place where I am now, where food doesn't really trigger panic attacks anymore. That's part of the reason why I love talking about food. It became, in a really healthy way, an actual coping mechanism. Like learning and watching food became a real way for my anxiety to sort of break, which was immensely healthy for me. That's sort of the reason why I like YouTube in general, because it's a place for you to grab more information, hopefully connect with somebody, and maybe if you're like me and you're struggling with that kind of like food anxiety, learning and taking in information isn't just a arbitrary thing that you do for entertainment. Maybe it's something that will actually make a lasting impact on you. If a kid who really, really struggles with anxiety around food can grow up to be someone who loves and thinks about food all day long, maybe it can happen to you too. So I really, really hope that is not something that consists in your life if it's something that you're dealing with right now. Let me know in the comments if this is something that you've dealt with in the past and sort of how it's played out in your life. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for all the amazing people who support me directly on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a supporter and getting those benefits, go to patreon.com/CameronMarty. If you really, really liked the video, share it to someone that you think will enjoy it as well. Cheers.